video on making chickpea bread. So I was watching a video, and this it's a really good channel, and he's made lots of different types of bread recently, and it's kind of given me the idea to kind of have a go myself. So I've made lots of different types of bread, and then they were making a bread made with bean flour, and it seemed like a bit of a faff. What you've got to do is you've got to grind the dried beans into a flour, and then they're kind of quite bitter in flavour. So then you've got to soak the flour 3 times, well, changing the water 3 times to get rid of the bitterness. And I was kind of thinking, that seems like a bit of a faff. Why don't you just cook the beans and then puree them, and then add them to a dough like that? That makes much more sense, doesn't it? Like you would do, like I've done with the butternut bread and the potato bread. Same kind of principle. So, and you could just kind of go, well, you could, why are you cooking chickpeas? Why aren't you just using chickpea flour? Because I need to cook some chickpeas anyway. So if we can use chickpeas, it means we can use any kind of pulse or any kind of bean. I don't know if a chickpea is a pulse or a bean, or any kind of like pea or anything like that. If we take the cooked version of the whatever we're using and turn that into mash it up, then that's what we can use. So although I'm making a chickpea bread, this could be a pea bread, this could be a kidney bean bread, this could be a cannellini bean bread. Same kind of principle. So I'm curious, for my own mind and the way I think about things, I've got 500 grams worth of chickpeas, and I've got a litre worth of water there. I'm going to soak that overnight, and we're going to cook them tomorrow. And I'm just kind of curious how much weight of water the dried chickpeas take on once they're soaked, and then we'll be able to do that because we're measuring things on the way. So I'll be able to measure the chickpeas once they've soaked up the water tomorrow to get an idea of how much water they've soaked up, and then we can take this, once we've cooked the chickpeas, we can weigh them again to see how much they weigh, just out of my, for me, for the recipe type of thing, and then we can get a kind of an idea. And then I suppose what we could do is we can equate that to, if we're going to use like a tin of chickpeas, you could simply buy a tin of chickpeas and pure it down with the water from the tin of the chickpeas, or any beans that you kind of quite like, and that's why we could use that to make as a part of the bread, if that makes sense. So that's what I'm going to do. That's the plan. We'll see how it turns out. They have been soaking for 12 hours, something like that. I drained them, and I've changed the water, so I had to put another litre of water in to soak them, because they soaked up most of that water. So there was 1 kilo and 60 grams worth of weight of chickpeas once they've been soaked, and then I put those chickpeas, drain them, and then some fresh water, and put in a litre of water over the chickpeas. Let's cook them, get them tender, and then we'll weigh them again, and then we'll kind of have an idea of, just for my own ridiculousness, I'm doing this, but anyway. And then what I think we'll use that cooking liquid as the liquid for the bread as well, so it'll have that chickpea kind of flavour, which I think will be kind of quite interesting. Yeah, so cook, see how long it take, I don't know, can't remember, hour, something like that, but up to the boil and then a slow simmer. Right, so I have cooked the chickpeas and cooled them down, and the weight now is about 1.2 kilos. So with some rough calculations, I've worked out that about 30 grams worth of chickpea flour would weigh about 72 grams of cooked chickpeas, and I reckon about 30 grams worth of another flour in the bread mixture that I'm going to do is about right. Anything more than that, then it starts to change the texture of the bread, and we lose too much gluten. So I reckon about 30 grams worth of flour, of another type of flour, is about right. Now, because that now is made up of water as well, so there's still the 30 grams worth of chickpea flour in there, but we've added water to it. So that's what the other weight in the 72 grams is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to puree those. Maybe that's a little bit too small to puree. And then we'll have a look at it. And then we might add some more of the cooking liquid. This is potentially going to turn a bit long-winded, but lots of my videos do, because I'm thinking my way through things and kind of like it's. So think about when I took my exams at school, what they used to say was certainly things like mathematics that show you working out, and then even if your answer is wrong, your working out might be right. So the working out for me is just as important as the end result, and if we can see the working out, we can see potentially where I'm going wrong and where I'm kind of what I'm kind of thinking, and kind of that's also kind of part of the process. So we'll puree those down, and then we'll kind of see what kind of volume that we kind of get, and then we might just be able to get away with a bit more. If it purees down kind of quite smooth, like the potato did, like when I added mashed potato to the bread, then we might kind of get away with it, or we might have to add some of the cooking liquid, which I've kept. And I'm to get some more chickpea flour in there, that's what I'm going to put in. So if I add some extra liquid to the bread, I'm going to use the chickpea water, because it's already flavoured with the flavour of the chickpeas. So I think that'll kind of, even if we end up putting in less whole chickpeas, well, mashed up in the end, we will have the flavour from the chickpea water, if that kind of makes sense. So we'll get the flavour without kind of losing too much of the gluten in the flour. I hope that makes sense. It kind of makes sense to me. But anyway, right. So we'll puree those down, and we'll have a look, and we'll look at what kind of volume we kind of get, and if it's a little bit, if it's, it kind of wants to be like a thick hummus kind of consistency. But we'll puree it down, and we'll have a look at it. I'm going to do it in the, I think I'll do it in the spice blender rather than the food processor. I think that will work better, but we'll see. Right. So because it's not wanting to puree it down smooth, so, and there's still some kind of chickpeas in there, so I don't want to make too much of a mess of everything. So let's add some liquid to that to make it up to a weight of 150. So let's add 75 grams worth of the chickpea water to that, and then that might make up the right amount of, that might be about right. So yeah, I'll have to do it off camera. Let's add some more liquid to that. If we're gonna add the chickpea water anyway, and that's about the right amount of flour, chickpea flour that we will be adding, but we've hydrated and cooked the chickpeas. By adding the liquid to that, that will be the right amount of liquid for the bread, wouldn't it? Like 150. I'm going to use a little bit more of chickpea. Yeah, so let's take that 72 grams, take that up to 150 grams, add some chickpea water, and that'll kind of get it about right, I think. We can always have a bit of faff with it. I think should work. So I had to make up a little bit more because you kind of when you're pureeing things down, you lose a little bit of volume of things on the blades and the inside of the container, all that kind of stuff. So I made up a little bit more than just 150 grams. So you kind of make up 200 grams worth. That kind of makes sense. And it's kind of quite liquid, it's that. But the butternut puree liquid bread that I made, butternut was about that kind of consistency. So I'm forgetting that it's mostly liquid anyway. So there is, in this bowl, there is 300 grams worth of strong bread flour. There's a pinch of salt at the back, and then there is 200 grams which of my Active Sourdough Starter. There is an Active Sourdough Starter. It's half flour, half water, and the activated yeast. So that was nice and bubbly. Well, it was a couple of hours ago. It'll still be fine. And what was I going to say? Yes, so when I made the potato bread, it took a long time to prove, and I kind of think that was because of the amount of potato to flour ratio. Now, what I did try and do a while back was see if I could use gluten-free bread flour to make a sourdough starter out of that, just out of curiosity, because I'm curious about those type of things. And it didn't, and it kind of worked for a little while, but then the starter died in the gluten-free flour, and I think it was because the sourdough starter likes wheat, or it eats the gluten in the flour. I think it eats gluten, but it likes wheat flour. It doesn't like any other types of flours. So I think that's also a reason why we're not going to be putting too much chickpea flour, chickpea puree, into this, because the sourdough starter won't like it, and potentially it might retard its growth. So that's another reason why I'm only using like 30 grams worth of, well, equivalent of 30 grams worth of chickpea flour. So mix these together. Just get that. I've got a spatula somewhere. So get all of that out there, and then we'll use proper sourdough techniques. So we'll roughly mix it together and then leave it for an hour, and then we'll see what kind of state it is in after an hour. So what we do is when we're mixing a sourdough, we mix it roughly and leave it for an hour, and then what happens is that gives the liquid to completely saturate the flour, the liquid to be completely absorbed by the flour, and then that's why we can get away with a sourdough with adding more liquid, because it's completely saturated and left for an hour. So it also starts to ferment in that time, but it just gives it that extra amount of time. And it's one of the techniques that we use to be able to add more liquid to a sourdough dough, because they are a lot wetter dough, or a sourdough, rather than using a fresh yeast or a fast-acting yeast. I think it's different types of yeast. In a fresh yeast and a fast-acting dried yeast, then a sourdough starter. We're using a natural yeast in the sourdough starter, whereas a fresh yeast or a dried yeast is a certain type of yeast. We say yeast, but there's lots of different types of yeast. Like yeast is an umbrella for lots of different types of. I think there's a proper name for the yeast, but if you kind of think the same yeast that we make bread out of is not the same yeast that we brew beer out of. It's a different type of yeast, even though we just call it yeast. So yeast is an umbrella. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, but it fit. All the different types of yeast are called yeast, but they all have individual names. And I think with sourdough, depending on where you are in the world and the climate, will kind of dictate which yeast you're collecting for your sourdough. So there will be. That's kind of quite. That's nice. Seems like a nice soft dough. So there will be different sourdoughs. So I'm going to take a guess here, but like I wouldn't be able to use a sourdough starter from a warmer climate, because it wouldn't be, or the yeast I collect in the UK wouldn't be the same type of yeast that you get in somewhere a little bit warmer. So say Southern Europe or North Africa. It'd be a different variety of yeast. Still a yeast, but a different variety. So that feels alright, does that? That feels alright. So we'll leave that for an hour, and then we'll give it a knead, and then we'll see what happens. This is going to be a video that's going to be far too long. I'll try and make my video shorter, but it doesn't seem to work. Let's have a look. It's alright, isn't it? That. It smells really bready, yeasty, which of course it does. I'm not gonna. The bread's on top of it. The bowl's on top of the cooker, so that's a little bit not very good for kneading. I think that's going to be okay. I think that's going to be okay. So I'll give it a knead for 10 minutes. I'm not going to knead it here because I'm on top of the cooker and I can't be able to move the camera. So we'll give it a knead for 10 minutes and we'll see what happens. If we need to add a bit more flour, I don't think we will. But we'll see. If I need to add in more flour, I'll say that I've added some more flour. So it's been kneading for about 10 minutes and it's gone like that. So it was okay to start off with, and then it firmed up and then it softened up, which normally happens when you're kneading bread anyway. Now it's got less gluten in because of the chickpea flour, so that might be a reason as well, but it's not kind of holding, it doesn't hold together as much. But I've made sourdough with a plain flour, which I assume that's a all-purpose flour, the flour that you make pastry out of. Now I've made a sourdough out of that and it works. My hands are getting a bit sticky. We'll just carry on talking until I wash my hands. So it does work with a low gluten flour. You can make a loaf. Not brilliant, but it's acceptable. So I'm not going to add any more flour. I think that'll be fine. If we'll ferment it, let it rise, double in size, which will probably take 10 hours. What time is it now? It's about 7:30 in the evening. So I'm up early tomorrow morning, so I'll have a look at it again tomorrow morning. Might have a look when I come home from swimming later on tonight. But I think it'll be fine, and we'll just kind of give it a go. If we need to, if it's too soft and we need to knead some more flour into it, that won't be a problem. We can do that. We can do that tomorrow. I'm more concerned as if it's actually going to rise at the moment, because we've introduced a different flour, which the sourdough starter might not like. It didn't particularly like the potato as much, but it was fine with the butternut. So, but anyway, don't need to shape it. We'll just leave it in there. We'll let it rise, let it ferment, and we'll see what happens, what it's like. If I come in and it's fine later on tonight, I won't bother filming it. But if something interesting has happened, I hate putting this. There we go. But if something interesting has happened, we'll film it. Otherwise, it will be in the morning when it's doubled in size. Let's have a look. Oh, there's a light on. There we go. That's doubled in size, isn't it? So let's knock it back. We'll cool it down in the fridge, and then we'll shape it into a dough, and then we'll let it slowly rise. I think that'll be for the best. This dough, it's had a couple of hours to cool down, well, probably a little bit longer, but we'll see if we can. I don't want to leave it too long in the fridge cooling down, and then can potentially lose some of its rising, and then kind of have to knock it back and then shape it. The potato bread was a little bit difficult to kind of work with, so we'll see what happens. Now we've got some. We need to just give it a knead to smooth it out. I don't know if it might need proving outside of the fridge, but we'll see. We'll leave it for 12 hours in the fridge. So it's 12 o'clock now, about lunchtime now, so we'll see what it's like at 12 o'clock tonight, and then decide if we're going to leave it out overnight to prove in a slightly warmer environment than the fridge. But sourdough is sour, so we're trying to create a sourdough. So a slow fermentation is what gives us that sour flavour. The chickpea in it might just kind of retard the proving, but we'll have to see. So yeah, so I think, like in pulses and beans, you have to like, you can't eat some raw pulses, can you? You have to cook them, because there's things inside them that upset your stomach. So I kind of think if they upset your stomach, then potentially they would kill any yeast as well. I'm just heating up my lunch. So we'll see. So we're creating tension in the dough by pushing and squeezing. So what we're doing is the dough there is getting stretched and pushed around underneath. So we're doing that kind of motion, so it's slowly making the top smoother. Although it's not going to get smooth because it's not just 100% wheat flour. So that kind of movement. There's lots of different ways of doing it, depending on how soft your dough is, but this way works for me. So it's a push and a push and a push and a push under. So you're doing that. That's that. Doesn't feel like it's risen over the last, need a bit of flour, over the last 3 hours it's been in the fridge, so I think it'll be a slow process of proving, and I think we'll need to probably just leave it like that, but I'm going to put it in the fridge, so we'll see if it proves in the fridge, because it's a learning experience, isn't it? So we need to know which way works. So it's had about 12 hours, no, 24 hours in the fridge, and then we've just had it out of the fridge for a couple of hours. So it's starting to split there and there. That's obviously down to the chickpeas in it. So the oven's on. Pot's ready. Oh, I've got some water. My knife's not ready, but it'll be fine. So, bread in the pot. Slice it on one side, and hopefully we'll get that split open. Although it's split open on the other side. And then spray water on the side that we haven't split it. That'll give us a nice crust. Lid on, and then in the oven for 25 minutes. And we'll see what it turns out. So 25 minutes. Yeah, so it was in the proving basket in the fridge for about 26 hours, maybe 27 hours, and I've just had it out of the fridge for 2 hours just to kind of finish off the rising process. But it did rise in the fridge, so that's okay. So we'll see what that's going to look like in 25 minutes or so. 25 minutes. Let's have a look. Oh, hasn't exploded into life. Bit heavy again, but it has risen. So, I need to put that somewhere where it's not going to burn anything. Can't put it in the oven because the oven's full. Is that going to burn much yet? Probably no, it won't be fine. So, hasn't risen any further. Feels a bit heavy. We'll see what it's like when we cut into it. Let's have a look and a taste. Feels heavy. So did the potato bread though, and that was kind of quite nice. Actually, it was delicious. But anyway, yeah, it feels really dense. I was thinking that maybe sourdough starter is a sourdough bread's not the way to kind of go with when you're putting other ingredients in the bread, like potato or chickpeas, because it's the yeast in the sourdough feeds on the flour. So whereas you kind of want a yeast that doesn't particularly feed on the flour, like a fast-acting yeast or a fresh yeast, a dry yeast. Fast-acting yeast is dry yeast. But anyway, so that's very dense, isn't it? That's very dense. But let's have a taste. I'm going to eat it, or I'm going to use it for something. But I would have expected that amount of flour would have made a loaf that was almost twice the size of that. But we'll kind of see. So, smells good. Smells good. I mean, it's been fermenting, so it should have quite a sour flavour to it. So it's got that. Because of the slow fermentation, it's got that lovely sour flavour. I mean, there's got to be something in that, hasn't there? That when you can slow the fermentation process down by adding a different type of flour, that's got to be part of it, hasn't it? That when you're making sourdough, potentially using a different flour to slow down the fermentation process and to therefore make it taste better. That's kind of quite interesting, isn't it? So that's a thought to keep at the back of my mind and think and have a think about that. It's nice. It's just a bit dense, so I kind of think that it probably needs to be made with fast-acting yeast, dried yeast, fresh yeast, rather than a sourdough starter. And then it would probably rise more. And the same probably goes for the potato bread. The pumpkin bread was fine. Well, butternut squash bread, pumpkin bread was kind of fine. That rose particularly very well. I don't think I've got a piece left. I've got a piece left, maybe. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I froze some. So it's frozen, but that was the pumpkin. That was a butternut, and you can see how much. It's a very similar kind of recipe ratio, and you can see what difference there is in those type of thing, can't you? You can see the difference. You know that there's bigger air pockets on that one. So I don't know what to kind of conclude. I think I'm not going to have a go with a fast-acting yeast because I bake enough bread already. I don't want to give myself too much to do, but I might revisit it sometime in the future if I get into fast-acting yeasts. But it's generally with most things that I do, I'm curious about something, so you have a go, see if it works out. If it doesn't, or it does, either way you learn something, and nothing's ever a huge disaster, you know. And then when you do something else, you can take what you've learned from something completely different and apply it to something else. So I think when I tried to get I've got some gluten-free flour, and I tried to get the sourdough starter to work in that, and it didn't. It worked for a little while, and then it died. And I think it probably worked for a little while because it was eating up the last of the wheat flour that was in the starter, and then once it had eaten all that wheat flour, there was nothing else that it could eat, and it died. So that's kind of quite interesting, but that also kind of explains what happens with the sourdough when you're using different types of flour. So like corn flour or a maize or a chickpea flour or a potato flour, you know, all those things will affect the sourdough starter, which you probably won't get with a fast-acting yeast. But anyway, there we go. Kind of a success. It's nice. I'm going to eat it, but it's just a little bit too dense.